Now we're recording. Okay, we get to start a new chapter, and now you know what the authors did, right? Not the authors, the translators. Okay, this is a fun time to do it. I always have to do it, right? These are historical documents. So when they started out, remember, there's no spaces between any of the words. There's no punctuation. There's no sentences. There's no sentence structure. There's sentence structure, but there's no periods. There's no punctuation. There's no paragraphs. There's nothing. So you had to wait until I think it was about 800. In 600, they broke them into paragraphs, and they began to break them into chapters. And then about 800 A.D., they began to versify. The first guys that versified, we believe, were the Masoretes. The Masoretes started it because they were getting so much contention from the Christians that they said the Christians know their Bibles. They know their New Testament and their Old Testament really well. And so what's the best way to fight that? We need to know it well, right? And so the Masoretes were Jews, and so they thought of a great plan. Let's number the verses. Ooh, great idea. Because if you number the verses, then you can go directly to the verses. The biggest problem that they were having, the Masoretes were having double problems. The biggest problem was Christianity, but in 800 AD, you know what the second problem was, right?
The rise of the Arab Islam.
Yeah, the rise of Islam from about 600 AD. So, very interesting the things that caused these little incidents. But we have versification and chapters because of it. The chapters should be the beginning of a... Yeah, in English, we do chapters. Why do we do chapters in English? I mean, this is getting deep, and Jan's in here. I wish Jan was here because she might be able to answer this question. This is a tough one. Why do we have chapters? Just willy-nilly? Usually chapters in books, even fiction books, show a completed scene. Or maybe a chapter is a group of scenes, but you complete a scene with some kind of, usually hopefully a kicker or a cliffhanger, so that you get in the next scene, right? In thoughtful documents, like a historical document or whatever, you start a new chapter based on a new subject in English. So in Greek, and somebody I think said it, but in Greek, what do you think you start a chapter? You would start a chapter on? New argument. Yeah, new argument. Remember, we're doing a logos to telos. But are there any new arguments? I mean, there are new arguments, but are the arguments new in a Greek document?
They kind of run parallel to each other.
Yeah, they may run parallel. Okay, this is great because this is really important stuff. In a Greek document, the argument, the logos to telos runs for the entire document. And so at the end, you have your unstated telos. The author expects you to figure it out. But all through it, you have supporting logos to telos arguments that run parallel to the others. And sometimes they pick them up. Sometimes they don't reuse them. They always pick them up, and they're always fresh and new. The point is to always lead you to that telos, to that unstated telos. So in any document that's Greek, there is supposed to be a single logos to telos, right? But within it, there are supporting arguments. The last argument in chapter, the big one in chapter 7 was?
Christ is high priest.
Yeah, Melchizedek, high priest, right? The Melchizedek high priest thing. So let me draw my picture. I like my picture. Here's the picture. This is the cosmos. All of creation. Here is Philosophia, and within it, here is, gay. Yeah, beautiful, gay. That's the correct word, gay. The physical world that we see and can perceive with our senses. And so God, Theos, is out here. Theos is everything. And within the gay, we have Christ. Another color. So we have Christ, who is the high priest, king, and by the way, you notice, like I said last week, they don't talk much about him being the king, for good reasons, especially in this period. But you see, he's the one who did the sacrifice, right? So he's the high priest, and so the whole verse, the whole thing has been proving to us the importance or the precedence of the high priest. Because the proof for this, remember what I told you, what I tell you that Hebrews is all about. What is Hebrews all about? What is the Logos in Hebrews?
Does this work for me?
Does this apply to me because I'm not a Jew? Right? And so Melchizedek being a Gentile high priest, that means that the sacrifice that the high priest of Melchizedek, who is Christ, made is therefore sufficient for you. And so the meta-epithumia of God goes up from Christ to God, and vice versa.
Well, the paradox being Christ is God.
And the paradox being Christ is God, which is, look, this is really wonderful, deep kind of stuff, right? I always say it, you know, people say, okay, we don't talk much about theology. I'll talk about historical theology, but the important part isn't the theology. The important part is when you think about this stuff, this is really deep arguments. You know, okay, I'm going to mention this. You know, I think the biggest problem we have today, one of the biggest failings in Christianity that we have got to fight against and we need to bring back is it's not just the Bible we need to study. We need to go back and study all the classical literature in Greek and Roman and Hebrew literature. The reason is because that's what our forefathers did. That's what everybody in our foremothers did too. Every girl in Britain in the 20s and before, when they started schooling, all of the women, middle-class women, knew how to read Latin. They knew French. Many of them knew Italian and German. These were taught in the schools as basic subjects, and they expected you to be able to write in the language. They expected everybody to read and write this stuff. Every man coming out of school in Britain in the past, 100 years ago, knew how to read, write, all this stuff, and had read it. Part of our biggest problem today is we have a whole generation of people who may know something about the Bible, a sliver of ancient literature. If you have read all the banks of literature, you don't say stupid stuff like, well, there's miracles in the Bible. Guess what? There are miracles in every ancient text. Every ancient text from Caesar to Pliny to Herodotus to Theodocles are full of miracles. They saw miracles in all kinds of stuff. They had sacrifices going on. They're talking about God all over the place, gods and God all over the place, because it was part of their culture and their ideas. And so anyone who knows anything about ancient literature would not say something stupid like, there are miracles in the Bible. Because they know there's miracles in everything, in all the ancient literature. So it's like, you know, we need to get back into educating people in true educational stuff. Today, they get, you know, Bunny loves mommy, or, you know, give a mouse a cookie. And that's about as far as their educational level gets. We need to get well beyond that. We need to stop teaching kids stuff like Rachel Carlson, who has proven false in any case. That's a high horse, and it's true. I think that Christianity will fail if we do not get back to history. Because ultimately, Christianity is not based in theology or doctrine. It is based in history, period. So, the reason I'm mentioning this is because we're getting into the new chapter in chapter 8. We do get a change. And you figure out if you can tell what the change is, because that's the big deal, right? What is the new logos? Thusias. Thusis. Thusias. Thusis. Athusa. Athusia. It means specifically, it comes from thuo. It means to breathe hard. To blow smoke. To sacrifice properly by fire. By extension, to immolate. slaughter for any purpose. Specifically, this word means to sacrifice, the act or the victim of sacrifice. It can be a noun or a verb. It comes, like I said, from the primary verb, which means to sacrifice. This, okay, meta-epithumia, is that what you're going to say? Meta-epithumia. That's where this word is. It is a very critical word because it can only be used to mean a single thing. That is a sacrifice. But look where the word comes from. Okay, we say all the time, right? The Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit. Hagios pneuma. Pneuma. What is a pneuma? A conscious breath. What is a suke? Sarks? I haven't talked about these terms in a long time. Suke. Well, I haven't defined them. We talk about it all the time, right? Pneuma. Pneuma. Okay, a suke is an unconscious breath. You do it unconsciously. But a pneuma is a conscious breath. A thuo is a conscious, hard breath. Wow. Do you see a tie here? There's an enormous tie. Suke is just thinking. The Greeks believed that you thought thinking was the primary purpose of a human being and the primary quality of a human being. This is, if anyone, all these people, modern science says people are just animals, right? And then you ask them, where's the dolphins' hospitals? Do dolphins have hospitals? Do they have the wheel? Do any animals use simple machines? No, they might use sticks to pry bugs out of holes, but they ain't very smart. Do they think? It's a huge question. You know, science is trying to prove that animals can think. Why? Because then they can say, oh, you're just an animal. You're an evolved animal, right? The reality is Greeks thought that people thinking made you human. Animals do not think. They do things only by nature in their programming. And so far the data shows that's true. Animals don't have emotions, they can't think. The pneuma is the conscious breath. We would call that in English free will. So in the Greek worldview, free will isn't based in thinking. Remember, they said you were fated. So I think, therefore I am. Therefore, if I think, for example, I desire to take your property. Is there anything wrong with that in the Greek worldview? I just want to. What have I done? I'm thinking, right? I think I want your property. And then I go to take your property. Well, in the Greek worldview, that would be considered a dikasuni issue, right? Because why? It's not in balance. If I take your property and you take my property, well, that's kind of, I don't want that to happen, right? Dikasuni says I'm in balance. Dikasuni, I'm in balance, right? That's a Greek worldview. So therefore, I don't do certain things because even though I want to, even though I think to, and what does the New Testament say in terms of thought? You use thinking not as a fated point, but rather as something you do. Now that goes down to free will. Pneuma, the conscious breath. I consciously breathe in and out. I have free will. I can therefore direct my thinking. I'm not fated. And thusa, what is thusa? It has to be what kind of act?
Conscious act.
A total conscious act. That's right. It's an act of free will. The Greeks would say, the proof of free will is that I act consciously to do what? What am I always seeking? Well, not just balance, but with thusa, what am I thinking? What am I seeking with thusa?
A relationship with God.
A relationship with God, or the gods. Yeah. The Greeks would say that all human beings, and this goes from Socrates to Zeno to all of them, they assumed there were gods, and they assumed that you achieved a relationship with the gods through sacrifice. Now, if you read Meno, go ahead and read Meno sometime from Socrates, and Socrates has a really interesting take on it. In fact, there's parts of that in the Second Mission, my book I wrote, because I retranslated parts of that. But the big deal is the Greek worldview would say you are always, and by the way, in philosophy, until Kant, until Immanuel Kant in philosophy, what was all philosophy trying to prove? The existence of God. That is right. The Greeks said we all seek God. We seek God by free will consciously. And by the way, this is what the Hebrews are tagging on. The other word, we see thusa, sacrifice, but this word is one of my just favorites of favorites. Dora. So if you know a person named Dora, or Dorothea, Dorothea means the gift of God. Dora is a gift. But guess what a Doron or a Dora is? A Doron or a Dora.
Sex.
What's that?
Sex.
I think she's saying sex.
Sacrifice.
It is a sacrifice. It's a sacrificial gift. The difference between a thusa, these are both gifts. Okay? This is also a gift. This is a sacrifice. Okay, the difference is this. When I bring a sacrifice to the temple, what is the expectation? Well, I'm talking about in a Greek temple. Let's say a Greek temple. What's the expectation that's going to happen to the sacrifice?
You get something from the god. Maybe.
Well, yeah.
What's going to happen to the sacrifice? It's going to be burned, killed, whatever.
Right. Well, the big deal is it's going to be killed, and it's going to be offered. It's going to be cooked. It's going to be killed and cooked and offered to the god. And then what's going to happen to the meat? You're going to eat the leftovers, and it's going to go to the marketplace, and that's really cool because, oh, I get to eat meat. On the other hand, if I bring a Doron to the gods, what happens to a Doron?
You just gave it to them.
You just gave it to them. Which do you think is in higher favor in the Greek society? The Doron. Because people only gave a Doron. Okay, look, a Doron would probably usually be money, weapons, clothing. What do you think you don't have an abundance of?
Okay, when you say higher favor, what do you, maybe you misled us with that. In other words, if I'm going to give something and I've got a choice of not getting anything back or getting something for it, I'm going to...
Oh no, the people favored you would love to bring your sacrifice, right? Because then you get to eat.
So to us, that was most favored.
To the average people, that is the most favorite, right?
Yeah.
But, and you're exactly right. To the structure of the Greek society, what was encouraged the greater?
Well, the Doron, because the priests got their money and their stuff that way.
That's right. That's the way, remember, if you remember in Delphi, what did you go see in Delphi?
The oracle.
You saw the oracle, you saw the belly button of the world, right? But what else did you see? What was right beside it? You don't remember? Huh?
Little gift box, chicken.
No. Right beside the Delphitic oracle, right beside the thing, the closest building to it was the Athenian treasury.
Not anymore, it's a gift box. I've been there.
Well, there is a treasury. There's a foundation of treasury. And right over the side is the Spartan treasury and the Theban treasury and the Maccabean treasury. Every city had a treasury at Delphi. The biggest and most grandest was the Athenian. Where do you think they got the money? The Doron. If you go look in the museums for the Greek stuff, guess where 90% of all those weapons... We don't know if the weapons that they have in the Greek, like museums, were really weapons. Why?
It might have been sort of ceremonial or just nice to look at. Valuable materials.
Yeah, they were beautiful. If you go look at them, they got jewels and they're gold and silver in them, and you go, wow, did people really use these? No, we don't think they did. We think that they produced them to be Doron, and they granted them to the gods for meat, to have the gods do something for them. And again, look at Meno, look at, Socrates. But in any case, Doron was viewed as highest, and guess who is called a Doron? Jesus is called a Duran. Remember what it says in it's Galatians, right? The gift of God, right? You know what I'm talking about? What verse I'm talking about? The word is the Duran of God. Now think about this. Think about this. Why would God be given a Duran?
To himself.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? In other words, God is giving a Duran to mankind. And guess what happens to that Duran? It is both destroyed as a Thusa, and yet, even though it was destroyed, it returned. This you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you know, the problem with our modern society is we view Christianity as, oh, it's just a really simple thing. You know, those crazy Christians, they believe all kinds of crazy stuff. It's like, dudes, this is really deep theological and philosophical ideas that people soundly understood until the modern era. In the modern era, of course, it's all false, right? That's what they teach you in the schools, and then, you know, let's go to a Christian school or to a private school or to some school that actually has some attachment with reality. In the modern world, you're going to learn at Harvard that God is dead, and he's been dead for a long time. In fact, he's never been alive, and we don't believe in him, right? So that'll help you with your hookup culture. Yes, sir.
I don't want to get too far astray in what you're saying, but I want to go back to your free will situation.
Uh-huh.
Does free will change through learning? And the reason I bring that up is because of the scripture. I mean, as opposed to faith. I mean, here's Jonah. God wants him to go to this evil city, and free will indicated that he didn't have to go. So, you know, you're not fated to go there, Jonah, but I'm going to have a whale swallow you, and you spend 3 days inside the whale. Now, have you learned anything now? Has your free will changed? Or was he fated to go to Nineveh? I mean, what I'm saying is, and back to your point about separating animals from humans, what did Pavlov's experiment? Can animals learn? And therefore, can their activities or how they respond, do they have free will and now it's been altered through training? Because in their natural state, they wouldn't do certain things that animals do. Just like men in their natural state, as they learn more, their free will is tempered. I mean, it's not just willy-nilly. I mean, as an infant, they do pretty much whatever they want. They eat, poop, and cry. But after that, you know, as they go through learning, whether they've had the Latin and all the other things, they do change.
Well, this is a seminal thought, and so I was thinking that exact opposite. What you just said, which is really an interesting thought, is not incorrect. You know, as you gain control or discipline, free will, right? Suke, control over your suke, you gain, some would say you have less and less and less freedom and free will. I'm going to argue the opposite. I'm going to say that Panume, for example, how can you be an astronaut and be an undisciplined person?
No.
It won't happen. So therefore, if you're still in a childhood state, you could never reach the greatness of possibility that maybe you're capable of, right? So one might argue that the ability, the education expands your horizons and free will and ability to accomplish. Right?
It will in a tunneled version, yes. But you've given up a lot of things to attain being an astronaut.
That may be true. I put it even in another context, like, for example, the context of sexual immorality. If everyone, we know that God and also nature, the God of nature and nature's goal is for you to produce children who are successful in the world. That's known as Darwinian, what's the word? Darwinian reproduction. Darwinian, not selection.
Natural selection?
Not natural selection. It's the Darwinian reproduction. It's the
Propagation? Species? People think that by casting your sperm and eggs across the world,
you're going to create the most. That's not true. We know that through we know that correct understanding of Darwinian thought about sexuality is that when you see your children reproduce. Now, salmon put 1 million eggs down because they never can see their children reproduce because they die. But human beings can. And therefore, pouring your energy into children who reproduce, who do reproduce.
They can learn.
Well, they learn, but you then pass on.
You can teach them.
Well, that's right, but you pass on to them the possibilities. What I'm saying is this. In the natural state, like a man who is in a natural state or a woman in a natural state, that's hookup culture. How good is that? You're going to be screwed up mentally, you're going to be screwed up physically, you're going to have STDs, you may not be able to produce children because of infertility. You're messed up forever. Do you think your chance of seeing children be reproduced and children in the next generation? What's your chance? You know, you may leave a whole bunch of poor bastard children across the world, but it doesn't mean you see them successfully reproduce. You failed. So, again, you know, education, knowledge, moral restriction, or we would, you know, leads to what kind of end? You know, if you want to be well, you do. I'm saying everyone here, I don't care who you are, your desire is not to sexually have just sex with every human being that's out there. Your desire is to be a parent and raise children. That's what nature desired for you to do. That's what God desired for you to do. You see what I'm saying? So in that case, again, you know, less freedom in immorality, but greater success in freedom in morality or in control. Yes, sir.
The concept of live life and live life abundantly.
Yeah.
It's not just live life, but live it abundantly.
In any case, I think this whole concept of education is really important. But we're going down rabbit tracks, and that's okay. Chapter 8. Here's verse 1. The point of what we are saying is this. Do we have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven? Let's see what it says in the Greek. Now, day. It's not now, it's but. But, upon, epi, upon the things are added. The which, things which are added. We is added. Now, we is implied because it comes from the verb. We legoed. We legoed. We have legoed. This is added. Is added. The is added. It's kalathion, the thing to be seized. Thing to be seized. Kalathion. I love this word. This is one of those words. Kalathion. Kalathion. Theon. Head. Head to be seized. And the reason this is really cool is because, remember that thing where it says, God is the head of Christ, who is the head of man, who is the head of woman? And I told you, it isn't the head that you think. It's the kalaphon. It's the head that they're talking about is not a head of leadership, is a head of protection. Because in Greek, this word is a word that's a military word and also a wrestling word. To seize the head, right? In Greek. In other words, God protects Christ, who protects man, who is supposed to protect woman. This is what it says. It doesn't say that God is over Christ, and you can get into Greek deep stuff about this. But to seize the head, literally the thing to be seized, the head to be seized. We, it is added and implied by the verb. We to hold such, truly this, toitos, truly this. And is added, archerius, a high priest, archieris, a high priest. Hos is set, kathizo, to sit down on. The is added, the dextros, right hand. Hand is added, but it's implied. Of is added, but it's implied because of the genitive construction. The throne, thronos, is again implied. Ho, the majesty, literally the megalosune, the greatness in the heavens, in the Oranos. By the way, you notice here we have two verbs and two times when the we is used. this indicates how many authors to Hebrews?
Plural.
Yeah, more than one. So we believe that there were two authors of the Hebrews, and this is one of those verses that gives it to you. And by the way, if your author is suddenly drawing attention to themselves, what does that probably indicate?
You were there.
Well, not only were they were there, but if you're writing, you're suddenly writing a proof, and all of a sudden you get to a point and you say, and we say,
Come to a part of it,
They're in agreement.
they're in agreement, and we are coming to a point where they are giving you, if you look, you might find a telos, right? Matter of fact, I think we might have found a telos. Here's what it says. Here's a translation. I know this. It's hard to see this. That's why I give it to you in the Greek so you have it. But upon the thing to be seized, what is the thing to be seized from last week? Do you remember? It's the thing that the Greeks are seeking, thuthousa. What do we want to seize? They said it was suzo, that's salvation, but everybody wants to seize a hold of God. Right? Don't you? I mean, I don't care who you are. Look, you can't come here every Sunday and not desire to seize a hold of God. We do it. We seize God through our Thanksgiving sacrifice, right? And we are actually consuming God. That's the mysterion, right? The mysterion. Is it figurative? No, we don't believe it's figurative. We believe that we actually consume Christ. And that is what gives us, that is what allows us to seize a hold of God. Anyway, but upon the thing to be seized, we have argued, we have logos. We hold truly this high priest who seated down at the right hand of the throne of the greatness in heaven. In other words, what happened to our Melchizedek?
He's in heaven, at the right hand of God.
And we already said he was God. Guess what? Look at the picture. Okay, here was the sacrifice. The sacrifice is going up to God. The meta epithumi is going up to God. But the word doesn't mean the meta epithumi is going up one time. It means the meta epithumi is going up infinitely. Okay, let's see what the author talks about in the second verse. Here's what it says in Greek. And who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord and not by man? Here's what it says in the Greek. The A is added. Minister. This is an interesting word because it doesn't say diakonos. We'd expect it to say deacon, right? Diakonos or deaconess or something like that. Or maybe we would expect it to say an elder, a bishop, a presbyter. But it doesn't say that either. It says a liatorgos. A liatorgos. A liatorgos, remember at the beginning? Do you remember when we were talked about this right at the beginning? And in the introduction, at the beginning of Hebrews, it said specifically that they were talking about the liatorgos. The liatorgos was a public servant. It's a Roman idea, a Roman concept. It is not a Greek concept. Very interesting. And I think you can see why the authors wanted to do this. Remember, this is written to the Romans, and to the Greeks, and to the Jews, and to the Egyptians, and I'm going to put it to the Alexandrians just in general. If I use the term diakonos, whose term is that?
Great.
That's the Greeks, right? If I use the term priest, and we've been using the term priest over and over again, but the priest is a generalized term, but that really applies to the... Right. And if I use, the Egyptians are kind of into priests, right?
Yeah.
And the Romans, they have priests too. It's kind of a generic term. But if I'm not talking specifically about a priest, I'm talking about, let's say, a pastor or a deacon or someone who's a servant of Team Hodos, what word should I use? Very interesting. And this is probably the term that could get them killed. Because remember, I told you, we don't see him talking much about Jesus being a king. Because if you talk about Jesus being a king, who's going to get down on your head?
Romans.
Yeah, that Roman dudes, the earthly kings, the emperors, they're going to be upset. They might not be too upset if I appeal to the fact that my ministers are like Roman servants or officials. However, you think this through, where does this lead you? What are you putting your group equivalent to? To the Romans. So this could possibly get you in real trouble. In any case, Aleatorgos, a public servant, of is added but implied the hagion, a sacred thing. And Kai, added implied, of is added implied, the true alatinos, the not false. Skine. This is really interesting. The skine is a vessel that produces shade. A tent, right? A skine, a vessel that produces shade. Obviously, they're talking about the tabernacle. Well, maybe they're talking about the tabernacle. They're talking about a tent. When they talk about the hagion, we'll see what it says in the absolute, in a translation of his word. But it's interesting. Which, host, which the kurios, pitched, literally peg pneumai, to peg, and not man, not anthropos, not people. This is interesting. A public servant, this is a translation, a public servant of the holy place and of not the false vessel that produces shade, literally the tabernacle, which the Lord set up, and not man. I think this is a really interesting statement. I think we'll have to look more deeply into the context. But, yeah, do you have a...
I was just, you hear the term a lot, lay, calling people of the church lay ministers and so forth, and they're not officially sanctioned. Is that kind of what they're meaning here? Leaders of the church, people more than just sitting there listening, they're actually active workers in the church. Is that what it's referring to when it says public servants? Or is it someone with an official?
I think because this is probably written about at least after 70 AD.
I don't think there were too many seminaries at that time established.
Well, I think what we are seeing, I think the use of this term indicates which group is really becoming prominent in Team Hodos. Do you remember that Peter, who's the first real guy that Peter delivered the gospel to?
Wasn't a centurion?
Yeah, Cornelius, right? Matter of fact, he had to be encouraged. He wasn't going to talk about it, right? To the first, it mentions that Peter was talking to people in Jerusalem and right up, but the very first thing that we find out, he's going to visit a centurion, and the centurion was what? He was already convinced that he wanted to be a Jew, but what was the problem?
Some Jewish mother.
Well, he didn't want to be circumcised, and what's the problem with circumcision in the ancient world?
Other than pain?
Well, pain and suffering, yeah. That's a good point. No, look, these people were willing to go through a lot in life. So, apart from all the tapeworms, roundworms, and other things, problems they had with petulance, yeah, circumcision was probably nothing to them. But what was the big deal about circumcision?
Perish yourself in the bath.
That's right. The public nudity, the Jews did not become nude, but public nudity among the Greeks and the Romans was well established. All the Olympic Games were done in the nude. All exercises were done in the nude. The only guy that ever wore shorts, according to the Olympics, basically lost them halfway through the race, and he was wearing shorts for luck. That's what the Greeks tell us. So the Greeks did not wear clothing when they exercised. The Romans did not wear clothing when they exercised. The only reason they wore armor when they went to war was protection. You didn't want to get whacked with a sword in certain places or even other places, right?
Pain is greater.
Yeah, well, it's an unpositive situation any way you look at it. So the only reason they wore any kind of armor was to protect themselves, right? They would rather go naked, because if you're naked, people okay, I know the picture. You want to see the long-haired Roman and Greek fighters, right? How many do you think had long beards and long hair?
Something to grab a hold of.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Matter of fact, the Athenians demanded that all their military guys be clean shaven, because they didn't want you to. Matter of fact, there is a great Greek myth. Read the Greek myths of a guy that grabs a hold of a beard and chops the guy's head off. And so they're smart. You know, they would not play football with long dreadlocks or other kind of hair hanging out. They'd say, "Are you idiots?" Because somebody would grab you by the hair and sling you around, and that's the end of you, right? So all of these officers, all of these people were clean shaven. Matter of fact, what's your picture of a Roman officer? He's got long hair and a ponytail? No. As a matter of fact, the Gallics had problems, because guess what the Gallics like to have?
Long hair.
Long hair. A lot of it was because they wanted to stay warm in the wintertime, so they kept their hair long. Well, guess what happened when they started fighting the Romans? The Romans would grab their hair and their beards. And guess what they said? This is no kidding. It's written in Charlemagne. Read about Charlemagne. They said the Germans were really mad because they touched, in the Germanic culture, when you touched a man's hair or his beard, that was considered like an intimacy. So when the Romans grabbed him by the beard, they're like insulted, and then they get their head cut off. It's like, well, this is really bad. You know, it's like, you cracked me up. In any case, it's really funny how cultural things, and this stuff is stuff that, it's been known for a bazillion years, in any case.
Well, comment, only the highest rank would dare to wear beards, because nobody's going to touch them.
Well, usually they didn't, because remember a legate. If you go look at all the Roman statues, how many had beards? Almost zero. Almost zero. Because remember, Romans, doxa. How much doxa can you have if people can't tell what your face looks like? Just think about it. Just think about it. That's why in every movie you see, all the movies about, all the flying movies, right? When I fly an airplane, I always have an oxygen mask and my visor down, because that's what you do. It's safety. But every time you see a movie, what do they have? The visor's up and the oxygen mask down, so you can see their faces, right? So I just say it. A public servant of the holy place, and not the false vessel that produces shade, which the Lord set up and not man. The Lord set up and not man. So this is really a difficult kind of thing. I'll reread the NIV. It says, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord and not by man. It's interesting how they boiled down, because if you notice, and who serves in the sanctuary, a public servant of the holy place. But the word again is the Roman word. I'll go back to what I was saying before. It looks to me, and this may be absolutely true, that the Romans have taken, we know the Romans were very much encouraged in Teen Hodos. And it looks like they are really taking effect, especially in Alexandria. Now, if you think about it, where were a bunch of Romans back in about 70 AD?
Judea.
In Judea, that's right. And in Judea, they were basically fighting the Jews, right? And then there's this sect of Judaism that's Teen Hodos. And so it's a mysterion. And the mysterion's pretty cool. And you notice we already have a centurion. How many centurions are there in the New Testament? we hear about several centurions. Isn't this kind of interesting? We know that they had a proclivity. They have a real strong proclivity to Greek, right? But if they have a strong proclivity to Greek, what does that mean they're studying?
Philosophy?
Not just philosophy. What document is most available to all Greek speakers in this area? Yeah, LXX. So if they're reading LXX, now, how many Roman theological documents are there? There ain't a lot. How many Greek real theological documents are there? Not a lot. Most of them are all myths. And this is the thing. When you read a myth, it's kind of obvious it's a myth, right? The reason they're myths is because they're about the gods and about this, seasons. And guess what? These people are moving. I've been drawing this on the board a long time. But remember, we start with animism, and we move to pantheonic paganism, and then we move to Mysterion, and then we move to Gnosticism. Now, there are no Gnostics around yet. Gnosticism comes with Christianity, unfortunately. Isn't that interesting? But they're all Mysterion. And the Mysterion, you're beginning to see what? What is Mysterion beginning to show you? Number one, you're not fated. But number two, natural forces in the world, like gravity or fire or whatever, are natural forces. That's what the Mysterion is all about. The discovery of mysteries, of things that cannot be explained, but to them are miracles. They're absolute miracles because they can't explain why they happen. Like, for example, if I mix vinegar and soda and it fizzes up, that could be a great Mysterion mystery. Because it always happens. I can show it, but it's like a miracle. What a cool miracle, right? Why does it happen? Animists would say it happens because of the spirits within the stuff, but it's not living stuff, right? It's dead stuff. It's just liquid and
It's
chemical.
inorganic.
It's inorganic. Yeah, well, it actually is organic, but that's cool. It still does not look. Where did it come from, right? It's not like a dryad, like a piece of a tree. Pantheonic paganists would say, what? How does it happen?
It would be a myth explaining the...
Yeah, a myth. A god. A god is doing it, right? Some god is actually doing it. But the Mysterion guys would say, what's happening? We don't know. It's a mystery. It's a mystery, but it always happens. They would say, but what is the cause? It doesn't come from necessarily God, but it does come from God.
Would be a precursor of the science, of the Enlightenment. I can see that, how that
Yeah.
thoughts, that nature of thought is a precursor to the Enlightenment, and a precursor, even though it's about 1,000 years prior.
That is
Or
precisely
more like
correct.
1,500 years prior.
Well, this is how we got to the scientific method, because these are unliterate, these are literate,
Examination.
and these are philosophy, right? And then Gnosticism is science, comes from science. So it's very interesting.
How one leads to the other.
Yeah, you're precisely correct. Each one leads to the other. And so now we have these Romans, and the Romans are literate, and they're Mysterion. They're all Mysterion folks. Every one of them in this period are Mysterion folks. So they are looking for it. And guess what? These Teen Hodos guys come out and they say, we aren't a Mysterion, but they sure look like a Mysterion. And all the Romans and Greeks go, you're really a Mysterion. Can you see this? And they say, what is your Mysterion? And they come out and say, Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And they go, what? What do they say?
You just told us this.
You just told us a mystery. How can you do that? How can you tell us a mystery? They say, well, to join our mystery, all you need to do is, we have some training, we have some stuff we'd like to teach you, we'd like you to learn, and then you're baptized. And all the Romans who were studying about this Jewish thing, and there's bunches of them. We know there are bunches of them. They go, well, do I have to get circumcised? And what do they say? No. Especially now, this past 70 AD. And guess, after Jerusalem got quelled, where do you think a lot of these centurions and Romans went? Where did the Jews go?
Alexandria.
A lot of them went to Alexandria. So guess where If you had a group that was causing you issues, and you just beat the you know what out of them, the tar out of them, and they had run away, what would you do?
Keep an eye on them.
I keep an eye on them. So I wish we had better records, because if we had better records from the Roman Empire, I bet we would see that, you know, at this time they sent all these, they probably sent a couple of Roman legions down into Alexandria, just keep an eye on them. But guess what? When you bring them in, you bring in these Romans, and guess what the Romans are? Remember in Jesus' time, they were obviously acclimated, well, it's just like the military here. You can keep some of them on the military bases, but you don't have a place for every one of them, and some of them don't want to live on the military bases. So like when I was in Germany, we lived off the military base, because it's more fun to live where the Germans and eat German food and all other cool stuff, right? So what do you think they were doing? And by the way, if you read my book Centurion, was it legal or illegal to have a wife? It was illegal. And a lot of these centurions and Romans, they had wives unofficially, and guess what? When they left, their wives didn't leave with them. Oh, these, you know, this happens even in the modern, well, Madame Butterfly. Ever seen Madame Butterfly? Right? Of course, we want to slap the Americans for being, for the time, but in any case, if you look back in history, this is something that happened historically. You know, centurion that Peter went to, did he have a household? He probably had a wife or more, right? Interesting. But you can see these things in history. Let's look into 3.
Question.
Yes, sir.
You draw animism, pantheonic paganism, but Judaism was really something different, going directly to monotheistic.
Yes. Judaism is very interesting because it starts as animism. You know, kidding, starts as animism and starts to move into pantheonic paganism, because guess who the original god? What was the original god of Abraham? Abraham.
Moon?
Huh?
The moon?
Yeah, the moon goddess. Ura, the moon goddess. But for some reason, he left. Matter of fact, it's called Ur of the Chaldees. Ur of the Chaldees because it's named after the moon goddess Ur. And he left his area and for some reason decided, well, we know why, right? But that's a theological question. But for some reason, he went from the pantheonic paganism that was just beginning in the Ur of Chaldees to become monotheistic, which is totally unique in the history of the world. There are only one other group historically that we knew did that. Anyone want to guess? Tutankhamun and the Egyptians. And Tutankhamun was right after what?
Joseph.
Just after Joseph. Remember Joseph? Look, what do you think you would do if you're a whole nation and you were wiped out by what? 10 plagues, and all your firstborn were dead, and then these people said it was their God, and they take off and leave across the Red Sea. You know what happened? For about 2 generations, Tutankhamun, who was a single monotheistic deity, became the head of the Egyptian thing. And then about 2 generations later, they went back to their polytheism with almost a change. Historically, that's what I write about in my book, Egypt, because historically that is really an amazing kind of thing, I think.
Wasn't it Akhenaten?
Akhenaten.
Or was it-
Yeah, not Tutankhamun. I used to remember how to say
His
it.
father?
Akhenaten. No, it was actually the god. But yeah, they do relate it to a person. But it was Atenkamen. The Aten. And in my books, I refer to the monotheistic god as the Aten for that reason. In any case, let's look at 3. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, so it is necessary for this one also to have something to offer. All right. Did it give it away? What are we going to talk about next? What do you think? We're going to talk about what the Melchizedekian high priest has to offer. We already kind of talked about it at the beginning, but now, you know, the author is going to drill down into a logos to tell us about the thusa and the duran. As a matter of fact, let's look. For gar is gar, assigning a reason. Pa, all, every one high priest, archeus, is, that's added, it's implied. Ordain, karisteme, to place down, to offer, prospero, to bear towards God or the temple. Remember, we had prospero and we had prosecita, whatever, to the market or to God. So prospero, to God or the temple, gifts, doran, sacrificial gifts, and kai, thusa, and thusa. Thereupon, hotan, from which cause the it is added, of is added, necessity, literally angakas, to constrain, not necessity, but constrain, that is added, tutan, this man, have literally to hold somewhat, tis, some, also, kais, and, not also, but and, to prospero, literally to bear towards God. Here's what it says in the Greek. Assigning a reason, all high priests are placed down to bear towards God sacrificial gifts and the sacrifices from which cause requires this man hold something also to bear towards God. So, in the Greek, it says, assigning a reason, all high priests are placed down to bear towards God sacrificial gifts and the sacrifices from which cause requires this man. Who's this man? Jesus, the priest, the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, holds something also to bear towards God. So in our logos to telos, we're moving from the priest to the sacrifice. Because the proof text now is we've proven that the sacrificer, the high priest, is sufficient for us Gentiles. But now we need to prove that it is also the sacrifice that it is for the high priest, or that is sufficient. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray, amen.
There's some good series on Netflix I've come across.